So in this lesson, we're going to talk in depth about one built-in directive that you're undoubtedly going to be using a lot, which is ngRepeat. And ngRepeat is the directive you're going to use to iterate through an enumerable collection that you want to consume in the view. Okay, well, what the heck does that mean? We'll start with a very simple enumerable collection. Let's just say an array of integers. So we'll say scope.myArray is an array of 1 to 5. And then we want to use this in the view. ngRepeat will consume this array in the following fashion. You're going to attach the ngRepeat directive to a single HTML node, and that will be the parent node of the template. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So the argument to ngRepeat is going to be structured as iterator variable in the enumerable collection, which here is myArray, and since we are inside the main controller parent scope, we have access to myArray. This entire template is going to be rendered for each element inside myArray, if that makes sense. And so we can check this by just printing out what element is. And if we've done everything correctly, we'll see that we have 1 through 5 printed out. It's important to note that ngRepeat is being attached to this parent element, and it and everything inside is considered a template. So if we look at what we just printed out, we can see that there is one div printed out for every single element in myArray. Well, that makes sense. That's what we were expecting. So we don't have to use primitive types in the array. Obviously, we can use objects as well, and this is going to be the far more common use case for you. You're going to be consuming an API, making requests to your database, whatever it is, and it's going to be returning a list of data, probably formatted as a JSON, and you're going to be consuming that JSON as an array of objects. Let's try that then. So let's do scope.users, and then I've got some dummy data prepared here. We'll just stick that in there. 45 should be an integer. We're going to set up ngRepeat in the exact same way. I'll say user in users. The template will be user.name and then user.age. Get rid of this for now. So let's see if this works. Boom, awesome. So we can see that each template, the div, and then with the strong inside it, is printing out exactly as you would expect. So we are consuming this array of objects in the exact same way that we were consuming the array of integers. Let's get a little deeper into ways you can use ngRepeat. It might seem a little strange to you that you have to attach ngRepeat to a single HTML, and this makes sense because when you're rendering multiple versions of the template, you have to have a parent node, because then the question becomes, well, where does the template start and stop? You can, however, add on multiple sibling HTML elements to create the template in the way that you want. So if, let's say, you wanted to have a horizontal rule at the end for whatever reason, instead of going ngRepeat, which uses a single node, you can go ngRepeat start, and then ngRepeat end. And this is going to say, now these sibling HTML elements comprise the entire template. If we refresh, we can see that this works. So this is how you would create multiple sibling HTML nodes in the template. Some side notes to remember about ngRepeat. So Angular is actually associating each element inside the enumerable collection to a DOM node. And so they need to be keyed uniquely. Let's do an example. Let's copy the read element. And if we refresh, we can see that a new node is tagged on, there are no errors, and this is working fine because Angular is seeing that, okay, you've given me an array of objects, I'm going to key them in a way that will ensure that they are unique, and I'm not going to run into any problems. Let's comment this out, and then bring back our original array. And if we add in 5, and then try and print that out, we're going to see it's going to throw an error. And why is this happening? When you try and iterate through an array of primitive types, Angular is going to try and key these with the primitive type itself. And because there's 2 5 elements, it can't key 2 elements as 5, and so it breaks. So the way to prevent this is instead of using the default keying strategy, you have to override it. You're going to say track by $index. And if you refresh, you see that works. Now you're probably saying, hold on, what is $index? Good question. Recall that each iteration inside this enumerable collection is providing its own scope for the template. For every time the template is rendered, you're going to get a new scope, and you're going to have access to some properties of that. One of them is the iterator variable, so obviously you can use element, but that's not it. You also have access to some properties that describe where the iterator is inside the array itself. $index, for example, we can see here that if we print out $index, it's going to be the integer representation of the index in an array. But we're not just limited to $index, so let's get rid of this. We can also use things like $start, $middle, $last. These are booleans that represent whether or not something exists at the start of the array, somewhere in the middle is the last, things like that. And so we can see if we extend this a little bit, say 9, and we'll just stick these in toggled spans right here. So all this is it's a bunch of spans. These will act as booleans, and it will show if it's true, this string, otherwise it won't. And you were familiar with ng-show. So if we refresh, we'll see here, first and last, the rest are middle, and then even and odd alternate, which makes sense. So you can use these things to style individual templates, detect where it is, these kinds of things. They can be very useful. One other thing that's worth mentioning about ng-repeat is that you don't have to iterate through an array. Recall that it's also technically possible to iterate through attributes of an object in JavaScript. So if we were to go scope.ob, for example, and say name, Mike, age, 35, title, Mr., for example, we can also point an ng-repeat at this object, and it's possible to iterate through its attributes. So if we refresh this and take a look, we can see that the 3 attributes are being passed, not in order, it's worth mentioning, but ng-repeat is passed an enumerable collection that doesn't necessarily mean an array, and we'll iterate through that, giving a local scope unique to each rendering the template. And with that, you can create custom logic and custom template definitions for each element inside that enumerable collection. So this has just been a broad overview of ways that you're going to be using ng-repeat in AngularJS, and it should cover most of the issues that you'll run into, at least initially.